All right, good morning once again, church family. If you would open your Bibles to the book of Numbers. We're back in Numbers this morning after last week being in Revelation. Numbers chapter 13. And this morning we're going to be in the entire chapter, 1 to 33. So a lot to get to. So as you guys turn there, Numbers 13, 1 to 33. I won't be reading the text up front because it is so long. I'll read portions of it as we go through it in the exposition. I won't be reading all of it. The title of the sermon this morning is this: Don't let man cast a shadow upon God. So let's open in a word of prayer, and then I'll read the text as I go through it section by section. If you will, pray with me as we ask for God to speak to us now. Our Father in heaven, we ask for your grace to be upon us now, to hear your voice speaking through your word. We pray, God, that you open our ears and our hearts, our minds, our wills to listen, to receive the implanted word, and God, would you cause that word to produce fruit and sanctification in our life? God, would you help us this morning as we look at a text that deals with fear of man and a lack of trusting you. God, help us to grow, especially as we look forward to 2025. God, would you guard us from fearing man or fearing anything above you, Lord? Would you cultivate in us a healthy fear of you and a righteous trust of you, God, that sees just how great, how big you are, God. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. This morning we're going to be covering a whole chapter, so we're going to jump right in. I'm going to be reading sections of it. I'll start with exposition, and then I'll give application at the end. So let's start with Numbers 13, beginning in verses 1 to 3. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them." So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the people of Israel. So God speaks to Moses as the chapter opens, and he has some instructions for Moses. Here are his instructions: send men to spy out the land of Canaan. Now, what does that mean? What is God actually telling them to do, to spy out the land of Canaan? This word for spy out means to explore or to investigate, to search out, to try to find out new information. And which means that this is really a reconnaissance mission. It's not, they translate it as spy, but this is not a spy mission like James Bond or something. It's really more reconnaissance than anything. I want you to notice how God describes the land here. He says, "which I am giving to the people of Israel." Don't miss that. Don't miss that phrase that God describes the land as the land which I am giving to you. That's important because they haven't even taken possession of one city yet. And God is already telling them, "I'm giving this land to you." They are to select one man from each tribe. There are a total of 12 tribes. And they are to select one chief, one leader from each tribe. So 12 men, 12 chiefs, 12 leaders. So Moses sends the 12 from the wilderness of Paran into the land of Canaan. Now, after this, from verses 4 to 16, I won't read that section because verses 4 to 16 is simply a list of names. And these verses are going to recount who the 12 men are. The information that is given here is the tribe is listed, the name of the man, and whose son he is. And that's what those verses will tell us. Now, two names in verses 4 to 16 stand out to us. Number one, from the tribe of Judah, Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. Now, we'll see in just a minute that Caleb plays a prominent role in Israel's history. The second name that stands out to us is from the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea, the son of Nun. Now, who is that, Hoshea? We'll learn in verse 16. Look down in verse 16. These were the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua. We're going to see that Hoshea is actually Joshua. Now, we've already come across Joshua. We saw him in Numbers 11:28, if you remember, when he tried to stop Eldad and Medad from prophesying. Joshua is Moses' assistant. He's also who the book of Joshua is named after. So two of the spies, two of the leaders, if you will, are Caleb and Joshua. Now I want to point out that all 12 of these men have three things in common. A, they are all men. B, they're all from a tribe of Israel. And C, the most important piece, they are all leaders. They're all chiefs. They're all heads. They're all leaders of their respective tribe. Look at verses 17 to 20. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "Go up into the Negev and go up into the hill country and see what the land is, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land." Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. So Moses sends these 12 men on a reconnaissance mission. He tells them to go into the Negev. What is that? Negev is the southernmost part of Canaan. Negev often is translated as just south. It literally means arid terrain. So they are to go into the southernmost part of Canaan first, into the Negev. Then they are to go north into the hill country. If you go just slightly north of the Negev, there are hills that extend all the way from Judah to Ephraim into Galilee. And Moses says, when you go there, I want you to get a report, and I want you to bring back the report. That's why it's a reconnaissance mission. He's sending them to get information. He says, I want you to get 6 pieces of information. Number 1, find out whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak. Number 2, find out if they are many or few. Number 3, find out whether the land is good or bad. Number 4, find out whether the cities are they living in camps or do they live in strongholds. 5, find out whether the land is rich or whether it's poor. And number 6, which is interesting, find out if there's trees in it or not, which probably means for fruit and so forth. And then Moses gives them an exhortation. He says, be of good courage. The Hebrew phrase that's used there is used almost 300 times in the Old Testament. It's translated some 50 different ways. Here it probably means this: be brave, be bold, be courageous. And that's going to be ironic in just a minute. Moses tells them, he says, when you go to the land, not only do I want you to get this information, I want you to bring me back a souvenir. Bring some of the fruit of the land. Now, why does Moses tell them to do this? Is it just like he's hungry, he wants some fruit? The text doesn't say. My guess is that Moses wants them to bring back some of the fruit to inspire the people. I think Moses wants to give the people a foreshadowing of what God is giving them. That when the people see this fruit, they will know this is what God is giving us. And it was perfect timing because it was the season for the first ripe grapes. Look at verse 21 to 24. So they went up and they spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob near Laboth Hamath. They went up into the Negev and came to Hebron. Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were there. Hebron was built 7 years before Zon and Egypt. And they came to the valley of Eshcol and cut down from there a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between 2 of them. They also brought some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster that the people of Israel cut down from there. So the 12 men, they did exactly as instructed. They went and they investigated the land. They went from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob to Laboth Hamath. They went up into the Negev, and they come to Hebron. Finally, they settle in Hebron. That's a total journey. If you were to graph that, it's about 250 miles. So it's a long journey. 250 miles one way. They got to come back that 250 miles too. They eventually come to the city of Hebron. Now, why is that mentioned? This city is mentioned because Hebron is significant in Israel's history. It's where Abram first built an altar to the Lord. Remember when Abram came from Ur, he went to Canaan initially, and he settled there, and the place where he first built an altar to the Lord was at Hebron. It's where Sarah is buried. He buried his wife there. It's where David's kingdom will first be established. The narrator includes the detail that Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Why does it include that detail? I think it's to testify how ancient this city is. This is an ancient, ancient city. At Hebron are 3 clans. I don't think these are people. I think they're clans. Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai. Now, who are they? Why are they mentioned? They are the descendants of Anak. Now, why are these clans mentioned? And why are the descendants of Anak mentioned? If you read the book of Deuteronomy, the Anakim, which I think are the same thing as the descendants of Anak, the Anakim are mentioned 3 times in Deuteronomy as being a people who are great and tall, meaning they are big people, right? So I think it's to highlight that when they came to this place, the people living there, man, they're big. All right? Not only are the people big, though, so is the fruit. They come to the valley of Eshcol, and they get Moses' souvenir. The grapes are so big and so plentiful. Did you notice that they have to carry them on a pole between 2 of them? I mean, normally you think of grapes, you just carry it in your hand, right? This cluster of grapes is so big that they put it on a pole and carry it between 2 of them. They also get some pomegranates and some figs. As it turns out, the valley is called the Valley of Eshcol. Why? Because in Hebrew, Eshcol means cluster. That's why it's called that. Look at verse 25 to 27. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." So at the end of 40 days, which could be a literal 40 days or figurative. This is a side note. Whenever you see 40 days in the Old Testament, that can be literal. It can also be figurative. It's not necessarily always literal. They come to not only Moses and Aaron, but the entire congregation. And the 12 leaders, they give their reconnaissance report. They report back what they saw. They show them the fruit that they got. Grapes, figs, pomegranates. Keep in mind, the people have not tasted fruit for the past year. They've just been eating manna. So seeing this fruit would be like, man, that sounds like a good idea. And they specifically tell Moses, "We came to the land to which you sent us." Notice, that's important, notice they didn't describe it as not the land that God is giving us. They didn't say, "We came to the land that the Lord our God is giving us." They said, "We came to the land that you sent us." Look how they describe the land. It flows with milk and honey. This phrase brings us all the way back to the burning bush when God told Moses, "I have come down to bring them to a good land, a broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey." God had told Moses that at the burning bush he was bringing them to a land of milk and honey. Look at verse 28 to 29. "However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan." Did you notice that first word there? Verse 28. However, the report could have stopped. The report should have stopped at verse 27. But they add this, however. However. Look at how the people describe how the leaders describe the people in the cities. The people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified. They are very large. And then they add one more detail. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there, meaning large, tall people. They also give a report of where everybody dwells. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. Now, Canaanites will eventually become a term that refers to all these people, right? It's not yet, but eventually all of these people will be called Canaanites. It kind of takes on that association. Look at verse 30. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy, for we are well able to overcome it." Caleb speaks up. And the reason he speaks up is to quiet or silence the people. Caleb has something to say. He says, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." The Net Bible gives an interesting note here. It says that the construction is emphatic, using the cohortive with the infinitive absolute to strengthen it, with the sense of certainty and immediacy. Now, I know that means nothing to you. Here's what it is telling us. The way this should be translated is this: we should definitely, right now, go and occupy the land. That's what he's saying. That's probably the best way to translate that. We should definitely, right now, go and occupy the land. And the Net Bible gives another note for the second half of his statement. Here again, the confidence of Caleb is expressed with the infinitive absolute and the imperfect tense. Here's what that's saying: we are fully able to do this. Not just able, we are fully able to do this. You see, Caleb believes in the certainty of their victory. And it is because of that certainty he believes we should leave right now. We should go take this land right now because we can certainly do this. Now, I want to be clear. When Caleb says we are well able to overcome it, it's not because he's looking at the size and strength of Israel. It's not that when he heard this report, he turned around and he, saw Israel and he was like, yeah, we can do it. Because what did he see when he turned around? He saw a bunch of unarmed slaves who have been living in slavery for 400 years, who are probably malnourished and very weak and have been living in the desert. He didn't see fighters. He didn't see warriors. When Caleb said this, it's not because he turned around and he saw the size and strength of Israel. It's because he looked up and he saw the size and strength of his God. Look at verse 31. Then the man who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against this people, for they are stronger than we are." The leaders who went with Caleb did not listen to Caleb. Now, one side note, the men in verse 31 does not include Joshua. We know this from other texts. The men here includes 10 of the 12 leaders. Caleb said to them, "Not only are we able to do this, we are well able to overcome it." And the men said, No, we're not. We are not able to do this. And look at the reason they give. For they are stronger than we are. They're stronger than us. Now, I want to point out that what the men said is not necessarily a lie. It may very well be true. In fact, it probably is true. I would imagine these people are stronger and taller and bigger and more fortified than the Israelites. I would imagine that's 100% true. I don't think they lied at all on that point. Look at verse 32 to 33. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers. And so we seemed to them. So these 10 leaders, they bring to the people a bad report. You see, Caleb is trying to influence the people to go. And now they realize, man, we've got to speak up and start spreading a bad report. The word for bad report in Hebrew is sometimes translated whispering or slander or gossip. It's an evil report. It's defamation. What was the content of their slanderous report? They give 4 details. Number 1, it is a land that devours its inhabitants. What does that mean? A land that devours. The Net Bible also gives an interesting note here. The expression has been interpreted in a number of ways by commentators, such that, here are the options, the land was infertile, the Canaanites were cannibals, that it was a land filled with warlike dissensions, or that it denotes a land geared for battle. It may be that they intended the land to seem infertile and insecure. I think that when they're given this bad report, they basically want to tell the people, hey, this land, it's very infertile, which is kind of funny considering you just brought back this like massive thing of grapes and pomegranates and figs. They're like, oh, it's infertile. It's a very infertile land, you know. It's very insecure. Number 2, all the people that we saw in it are of great height. Now, I don't think they were giants like 30 feet tall, right? Often when you see that word giant, we think of like children's stories. Giants are like 30 feet tall. I don't think they were 30 foot tall giants. But here's what I do think. If the average Jewish male back then was around 5'5", then men who were 6'6" would seem like giants. Or men who were 7'6" would seem like giants. Number 3, we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. Now, who are the Nephilim? The only other place they are mentioned is Genesis 6:4. They are traditionally viewed as demigods who lived on earth before the flood. This, to me, seems most likely a lie as well. I think it's intended to frighten the people. I don't think that they actually saw the Nephilim. It wouldn't even make sense how they would see the Nephilim, considering the flood wiped out everybody except for Noah and his family. I think it's a lie, but maybe it's being used as a title. You can read the back of your bulletin for that. 4, we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. Which is interesting because it's like, how do you know what they're thinking? You know, like, why do they say grasshoppers? Grasshoppers were the smallest edible creature. It's kind of like us saying we seemed like shrimps, right? That's the idea. We're like shrimps to them. We'll stop there with exposition. Application of the text. What do we do with this? I have 7 truths for us this morning. 7 truths. Number 1, God has already told us that he will graciously give us all things. God has already told us that he will graciously give us all things. Chapter 13 opens with a command and a promise. Send men to spy out the land of Canaan. That's the command. Which I am giving to the people of Israel. That's the promise. Did you notice that God doesn't say the land that I might give the people, the land that I hope to give the people. He says the land which, what? I am giving the people of Israel. Now this promise goes all the way back to Genesis 12:7, where God said to Abram, to your offspring I will give this land. All the way back to Genesis, when Abram went to Hebron, God said, Abram, look at this land. I'm going to give it all of it to your descendants. That's how old this promise is. God repeats this promise to Abram in Genesis 15 and Genesis 17. He repeats it to Jacob in Genesis 26. Joseph repeats this promise in Genesis 50. God repeats it to Moses in Exodus 6. In fact, 6 more times, God repeats this promise to the Israelites. You see, these 12 leaders, they're not going to the land to spy it out, to see if they can take it. God's not sending them to say, hey, go see if you can win this battle. That's not what they're doing. This is not a military reconnaissance mission. They are going to see what kind of land it is. Just go see what kind of land it is. The question is not, can we take this land? Because God has already told them, I'm giving it to you. God said, go see the land that I'm giving to you. You see, I think sometimes we want all the answers up front. We want to know that we will succeed before we proceed. And God is telling us that we must believe before we succeed. God had already told the people that He would give them this land. It would not matter if the land was filled with fire-breathing dragons. They would still take it. Because God said He would give it to them. God has already told us He will graciously give us all things. He who did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for us all, how will He not also with Him graciously give us all things? Now, that is not a promise to get a new Ferrari or a husband. But it is a promise that God will give us His very best. The logic goes like this. Israel, do you think that I spent all this time and all this effort and all these miracles to break you out of Egypt to then not give you this land? Do you think that I went through all this work to not give you this land? That's the logic here. And the logic in Romans is this, church family, if God is willing to give His own Son, think about it. If God is willing to part with His own Son for sinners, can we not trust that He will give us His very best? Can we not trust that? Number 2, being a leader doesn't make you a leader. Being a leader doesn't make you a leader. I want to draw your attention to 2 words in verse 2 and verse 3. The words are chief and heads. These 12 men who were chosen to conduct a reconnaissance mission, they were not just 12 random men. Moses didn't just draw 12 names out of a hat. And it just happened to be Caleb and Joshua and these other 10 men. These 12 men were chiefs. They were heads. They were leaders. They were the leaders of their respective tribes. But only 2 of the leaders were faithful leaders. Only 2. Joshua and Caleb. The other 10, they weren't leaders at all. They were doubters. Being a leader doesn't make you a leader. I have known many pastors who are supposed to lead their church, but they are not leaders. I have known many husbands who are supposed to lead their wives, but they are not leaders. I have known many wives who are supposed to lead their children, but they are not leaders. I have known many disciplers who are supposed to lead their disciples, but they are not leaders. These leaders were supposed to lead the people to the promised land, and instead they led the people to Doubting Castle. If you want to be a leader, then lead people to trust God. 3, God doesn't tell us everything up front in order to test us. God doesn't tell us everything up front in order to test us. Have you ever wondered why did God send them on the reconnaissance mission to begin with? Right? Moses tells them to go and bring back information. He says, find out, are the people strong or weak? Are there few or are there many? Whether the land is good or bad, whether it's rich or poor, whether the cities are camps or strongholds, whether there are trees in it or not. Have you ever wondered, like, couldn't God just answer those questions for them? Why did Moses just ask God, God, can you answer these questions for me? I got a few questions for you, God. Why doesn't God just answer those questions for them? Why have them go on this reconnaissance mission? Interesting enough, if you read the book of Deuteronomy, it appears that the reconnaissance mission is not God's idea, but the people's. Deuteronomy 1, 20-22. And I said to you, you have come to the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. See, the Lord has set before you the land. Now, go up and take possession, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has told you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Then all of you came near me and said, let us send men before us, that they may explore the land for us, and bring us word of the way by which we must go up into the cities and how we shall come. Now, how do we reconcile those two passages? Because Numbers seems to suggest that it's God's initiation, and Deuteronomy seems to suggest it's the people's initiation. How do we reconcile those? Here's how I think it's reconciled. It appears to me that Numbers 13:2 is not God's initiation, but a concession. It's a concession. In other words, as they stood before the land, Moses told them, the land is set before you. Go up and take possession of it. But the people, they want information. They want assurances. And God concedes to their request. Now the question is why didn't God just tell them up front? Why didn't God just tell them everything they needed to know up front to test them? God knew that when he sent these 12 men into the land, they would discover two things. Number one, they would discover the land is good. And number two, they would discover that the people are strong. They're big and they're strong. The land is beautiful, rich, fertile, and the people are strong, fortified, and tall. And God is testing them. This reconnaissance mission is a test. Why doesn't God just tell us everything up front? Right? Will I get married or will I not? And if so, who am I going to marry? God, would you just tell me that up front? Like, if I'm not going to get married, God, just tell me now. Like, it'll save me a whole lot of time, a whole lot of heartache, a whole lot of pursuit. Just tell me now. If that's not your will, just tell me up front. Will we have kids or will we not? And if so, how many? How many are we going to have? Will I get this job or will I not? Should I move to this city or that city? Should I stay in this house or that house? Should I go to this church or that church? Should I invest in this opportunity or that opportunity? Why doesn't God just tell me up front? So I don't have to live in all this anxiety and worry and fear. Why doesn't he just do that? And here's the answer: to test us. To test us. Will we trust him? Will we trust him? 4, God delivers. God delivers. Back in Exodus 3:8, even before Moses went to Egypt, God speaks to Moses through a burning bush. And he said this: I have come down to bring them out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. God said back at the burning bush that the land they would go to was flowing with milk and honey. And when the 12 leaders returned, how did they describe the land? They said, it flows with milk and honey. God delivers. You see, we've all known scenarios where man doesn't deliver, right? Back in the 1990s, the Buffalo Bills went to the Super Bowl 4 straight years, and they lost 4 straight Super Bowls. They didn't deliver. How many times have we heard a politician on a campaign trail make promise after promise, and once they take office, they don't deliver on their promises? How many times have we heard brides and grooms make vows? Till death do us part. And a few years later, they don't deliver on those vows. I don't know if you saw recently, there was an Amazon driver who was so stressed with his Christmas deliveries that he dumped 80 of his packages in the woods. He didn't deliver the packages. How many times have we heard a CEO talk about next year's revenue growth and new products that are coming out? And then when the earnings report comes out, the numbers don't deliver. How many times do you go to buy a car and the salesman overpromises and under-delivers? Even Domino's Pizza had to give up their 30-minute pledge because they couldn't deliver in time without speeding. You see, we have all been let down and disappointed so many times in our life that we have become jaded. We've become jaded. We forget that when God says to us that He is bringing us to a land flowing with milk and honey, God delivers on His word. Brother, sister, God is not the Buffalo Bills. He is not a politician. He is not a cheating husband. He is not an Amazon driver. He is not an overly optimistic CEO. He's not a car salesman. And he certainly is not Domino's Pizza. He is Almighty God. And He delivers every single time. Five. Don't let man cast a shadow upon God. Don't let man cast a shadow upon God. I find it interesting that when the leaders came back, they didn't talk about how tall the trees were. They talked about how tall the men were. Moses said, find out whether there are trees there or not. And then when the leaders came back, they didn't tell Moses, oh yes, there are trees. And there are very tall trees. Their root system is very strong and fortified. That's not what they said. They came back and they said, the people are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. Did you notice what word is missing in their report in verses 25 to 33? Did you pick up on it? Did you notice what word is missing in their report in verses 25 to 33? It's an important word. God. God. There is no mention of God. His name is never mentioned by the leaders. Why? Why? Because they can't see Him. They can't see Him. Why can't they see Him? Because God is in the shadow of these Anakim. He's in their shadow. These so-called Nephilim, God is in their shadow. You see, the largeness of these men has caused God to become small in their eyes. These men are so large that they have begun to cast a shadow upon God. And they can't even see Him. They can't even factor God into their calculus of whether they can take this land or not. You see, fear of man causes two things to happen. Man becomes big and God becomes small. Now, this is true for just about anything in life, not just man. Don't let money cast a shadow upon God. Don't let your inability or your limitations cast a shadow upon God. Brother and sister, there can only be one giant in your life. And that is either going to be man or it's going to be God. Let it be God. Let it be God. 6. Faith is not using earplugs, but noise-canceling earbuds. It considers the facts. It is not controlled by the facts. Faith is not using earplugs, but noise-canceling earbuds. It considers the facts, but is not controlled by the facts. Now, I want us to consider the report of these leaders. Some of it is true, some of it is false. I imagine that the people who dwelled in this land, they were strong. I imagine the cities were fortified. I imagine the cities were very large. I highly doubt they saw the Nephilim there. I think this maybe is part of the bad report. But is it possible that they saw really tall men? Like 7 to 9 foot giants, like Shaq? Yeah. I mean, I think if any of us saw Shaq, it's a giant. Right? I think that's entirely possible. As the people of Israel listen to this report, it's not that they should put in earplugs. Right? They start to give this bad report and they're like, la, 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 I can't hear this. It's not that they should do that. Faith is not putting on a blindfold and putting in earplugs. Faith is not blind. It is not deaf. Faith is using noise-canceling earbuds. It's to filter out the noise. That's what faith is. It's to filter out the noise. Why? So you can properly hear the voice of God. That's what faith does. It enables you to properly hear the voice of God. Faith is not dismissing the facts. It's not that they hear this and they're like, oh, whatever, I doubt there's tall people there. No. There could be, like I said, there could be dragons there. Who cares? We've got God on our side. Faith considers the facts. It's just not controlled by the facts. The facts are this. Let's be clear. The facts are this. The people are strong. The cities are fortified. The cities are large. The people are tall. Those are the facts. But there is another fact. I find it so interesting that when people are trying to make decisions about like, well, should I get married? Should I move here? Should I take this job? Should I do this? Should I step out in faith here? And we always are looking at the facts, right? Well, what are the facts? And we forget that there's one other fact here. God is stronger. God is taller. When they built the Tower of Babel to be the tallest structure on earth, remember what God said? Come, let us go down, and confuse their language. God had to come down to reach their tallest structure. Faith is not using earplugs. Often we think that, when somebody is living in faith, that we think that they're putting on a blindfold and putting in earplugs and they're not considering the facts. And I want to say, no, that's not true. Faith is using noise-canceling earbuds, that I'm able to sift through all this noise that I hear. It considers the facts. It is not controlled by the facts. And 7, last point. Be willing to be unpopular. Be willing to be unpopular. There were 12 leaders. 10 of them doubted. That's 83%. 83% of the leaders doubted. Only 2 believed in God, Joshua and Caleb. That's it, only 2. Caleb was willing to speak up. Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy, for we are well able to overcome it." You see, it's not easy being the minority report. It's unpopular. I'll never forget Mark Dever in 2022. He's a pastor in Washington, D.C. He was speaking to a group of pastors at the T4G conference. He said this, "Have you ever heard it said that numbers don't lie? Brothers, numbers lie all the time." We see it right here. You think 10 out of 12 leaders can't be wrong. 83% of the leaders can't be wrong. And they were. They were. It was the 2 leaders who were right. It was the unpopular stance that was right. Brother and sister, be willing to be unpopular.